right, so data. It's everywhere these days, and seems like everyone's talking about it. We're going to deep dive into Microsoft Azure and specifically how it's used to manage all this information, especially as it just keeps growing.
Yeah.
And we're going to be taking a look at this DP-900 Microsoft Azure Data Fundamentals certification.
Yeah, you got it. This certification, it's really a great place to start for anyone, even if you're, brand new, who's looking to get into the world of data management.
So, okay, why should I care about the DP-900? What's in it for me?
Well, just think about it. Data is everywhere, and every business out there needs people who know how to, manage all this data and analyze it and, get actual insights out of it. And having this DP-900 certification, well, it shows employers that you've got a good understanding of the core data concepts and how they can be used in Azure in the cloud.
So it's like a signal to employers that, hey, I know about data, I understand it.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the world of data it's huge, it's complex. What exactly does this certification, like what does it really cover?
So the DP-900, it focuses on four main areas. You've got your core data concepts, the basics. Then there's relational data on Azure, non-relational data, and then analytics workloads on Azure. It's really a broad overview of how data is represented and stored, processed, and analyzed all in the cloud.
Okay, so in this deep dive, we're going to go through all those domains, breaking it all down. But before we get into the weeds, let's start with the basics, the fundamentals. How is data represented in the first place?
So think of it like this. Data can be structured, semi-structured, or unstructured. So structured data, that's the most organized, it fits perfectly in rows and columns.
Like a spreadsheet.
Yeah, exactly, like a spreadsheet.
So that's your classic database material, right?
Yeah.
Your customer info, names, addresses, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And Azure has services like Azure SQL Database, which are specifically designed for this kind of data.
Makes sense. All right, what about semi-structured data? Is that just like data that's a little messy?
Not necessarily messy. It's definitely more flexible. It doesn't have to fit in a strict schema, a format. Think of it like social media posts. Some are just text, some include images, and some have videos.
So it's data that has some organization but isn't, as strict as a spreadsheet. What kind of services in Azure can I use to work with this kind of data?
Azure Cosmos DE is a good example. It's built to handle semi-structured data like social media feeds or data that comes from sensors from IoT devices, where the information coming in can be lots of different formats.
Okay, and that brings us to unstructured data. Is that just a fancy word for a digital junk drawer?
It might seem that way, but actually it's the most common type of data. Think of images, audio files, videos, even big blocks of text. Really anything that doesn't fit neatly into a predefined structure.
So where do you even put that in the cloud?
Azure Blob Storage is a good example. It's like a massive scalable container that can really hold almost anything you throw at it.
So, okay, we've got these three basic ways to represent data. But then the question is, how do you store it in a meaningful way? I mean, it's not just one big hard drive in the sky, right?
Right. It's a lot more nuanced than that. Let's start by thinking about file formats, which play a big part in how we store and manage data.
File formats, like
Yeah.
CSV, JSON, things like that.
Exactly. And choosing the right file format can really impact how efficiently you store and process your data. Take CSV, for example. It's simple. It's used all over the place for tabular data, but it has a limited structure. It can get hard to work with larger data sets.
Yeah, I've run into that myself. So what are some other options?
JSON's a popular choice because it's flexible, it's easy to read, and it works really well with web applications and APIs.
Okay, so JSON is like a more versatile alternative to CSV. All right. Are there any other formats that I should know about?
Yeah, for big data analysis, you'll often see Parquet and ORC. These are optimized for efficiency and performance, especially when you're dealing with massive data sets.
So you choose the format that, best suits your needs, whether you're working with small data sets or, massive data lakes for big data analysis. What about databases? I know there are tons of different types.
Yeah, you've got two main types of databases. You've got your relational and your non-relational. Relational databases, that's the classic, the structured kind, where data is in tables with relationships between them. Think back to that structured data example, like a spreadsheet.
So things like customer databases or inventory management.
Exactly.
What about non-relational databases?
Non-relational databases, they're also called NoSQL databases. They're more flexible and can handle different data structures. They're great for things like social media, sensor data, and other situations where you just can't fit the data neatly into tables.
Okay, so we've got file formats and we've got databases. What else should we know about storing data on Azure?
Well, Azure has it has lots of different storage services, all tailored to different needs. For your relational data, you've got Azure SQL Database, you've got Azure SQL Managed Instance, and you can even run SQL Server on Azure VMs.
Whoa, that's a lot of SQL options. What's the difference between them?
Okay, so Azure SQL Database it's fully managed, cloud native, and it's great for new web applications. Azure SQL Managed Instance is kind of like having your own dedicated SQL server in the cloud, which is perfect for migrating legacy applications to the cloud.
Wow.
And then if you really need to control your whole SQL Server environment, you can run it on Azure VMs.
So you can choose the level of control and management that you want, that you need.
Mm.
What about non-relational data? What storage options are there?
Well, Azure Storage is a really versatile solution. It has different storage types. You've got blob storage, file storage, and table storage.
We talked about blob storage before for unstructured data. What are the other two used for?
So file storage is kind of like a cloud-based file share. It's great for collaborating and, accessing files from anywhere. Table storage is specifically designed for storing structured NoSQL data, offering, some organization but with more flexibility.
Okay, so Azure has options for all different types of data, with all different levels of control. It sounds like a really comprehensive platform. Now, what about actually using this data? I keep hearing about these different data workloads. What are those?
You've probably heard of transactional workloads and analytical workloads. These are the kind of the two fundamental ways that we use data.
I've heard those terms before, but I don't really understand the difference. Can you break it down for me?
Yeah. Okay. So think about transactional workloads as those focused on processing individual transactions very quickly and reliably.
Hmm.
Think about online purchases or, bank transactions or booking a flight. These workloads, they prioritize accuracy and consistency. So making sure that every step is completed without any errors.
So it's all about precision and making sure like everything is recorded correctly.
Yeah, exactly.
What about analytical workloads? What do they focus on?
Analytical workloads are about, taking large amounts of data and crunching it to find insights, find trends, so you can make good decisions. So, analyzing customer data to predict demand in the future or understand, trends in the market.
Okay, so transactional workloads they're about the immediate actions, while analytical workloads are about, understanding the bigger picture and the long-term strategy.
Right, exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got different ways to represent data, different ways to store it, different ways to use it. It seems like, data management involves a whole team of specialists. What are some of the key roles that are involved?
You've got your database administrators, your DBAs. They're responsible for the health and security of the databases. Then you have your data engineers who design and build the data pipelines, making sure the data flows smoothly from where it comes from to where it's going. And then finally, you have your data analysts. They're the detectives of the data world. They take the raw data and turn it into meaningful stories, extracting insights.
So DBAs are the guardians, data engineers are the architects, and data analysts are the storytellers. That's a good way to visualize the different roles.
Exactly, yeah. Each role plays a vital part in making sure that data is managed correctly and used to its full potential.
Okay, so we've covered the basic building blocks of data, how it's represented, stored, used, and even the different roles. Now let's dive a little deeper into how these concepts work in Azure.
Sounds good to me. Are you ready to explore the world of relational data on Azure?
Absolutely. Let's unlock the secrets of structured data in the cloud.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Azure data management. Last time we covered the basics, data representation, storage, and those different roles involved. Now we're going to explore relational data on Azure, so structured data.
Right. We talked about how structured data is like a well-organized spreadsheet, everything in neat rows and columns. But what are some of the key concepts that I need to understand when I'm working with relational data in Azure?
One of the most fundamental concepts is normalization. So it's the process of organizing data to get rid of redundancy and ensure consistency.
Normalization, huh? Sounds like a fancy word for tidying up your data. Why is it so important?
Imagine you have a customer database, right? And you're storing the city and state for each customer. Without normalization, you're going to end up repeating the same city and state information for every customer in that same location. And that wastes storage space and makes it really hard to update information consistently.
So normalization is about optimizing your database to make it efficient and accurate, like making sure everything's in its place and you don't have unnecessary duplicates.
Exactly. And then you have SQL, or structured query language. That's the language that you use to actually talk to communicate with relational databases.
I've heard of SQL, but it seems like something that only programmers use. Is it really that important if I want to understand relational data?
Oh, absolutely. Even if you're not, writing really complex queries, understanding the basic SQL statements is going to help you work with relational databases effectively. You need to know how to pull data out, to insert new records, update records that are already there, and even, delete information when you need to.
So learning SQL it's like learning the commands to tell the database what to do. What are some of these basic statements that I should know?
Some of the essential ones are create, alter, drop, insert, update, delete, select, and merge. Each of these statements has a specific function when you're, working with the data inside a database.
It sounds like SQL gives you, a lot of control over how you interact with your data. What about the tools and services that Azure offers for, managing relational data? What are those?
Azure has a whole family of SQL services. They all, they cater to different needs. So you've got, Azure SQL Database. It's fully managed. It's, cloud native, perfect for modern applications.
So Azure SQL Database is kind of like having a SQL server in the cloud, but without all the hassle of managing the underlying infrastructure, right?
Yeah, exactly. It scales well, it's secure, and it takes care of a lot of that heavy lifting for you. And then you have Azure SQL Managed Instance, which gives you almost 100% compatibility with SQL Server that's, running on-premise in your own data center.
That sounds really useful for companies that are moving their existing SQL Server applications up to the cloud.
Exactly. Exactly. It really reduces the need to make changes to the code and helps that transition go smoothly. And then if you want complete control over your SQL Server environment, you can always run SQL Server on Azure VMs.
So Azure's got, a range of SQL solutions for you to pick from depending on what you need and then how much control you want to have. Now, what about open source relational databases? Can I use those on Azure?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Azure has managed services for those popular open source databases, like MySQL, PostgreSQL, MariaDB.
That's great for businesses that prefer the flexibility and the cost effectiveness of using open source. So we've covered the basics of relational data on Azure, from normalization in SQL to the various SQL services that are available. But what about non-relational data?
That's where it gets really interesting. Non-relational data, as we said before, it doesn't, fit neatly into rows and columns. It's more free-flowing, often used for things like social media or sensor data, content management. Azure has some really powerful solutions for managing this kind of data as well.
All right, let's dive into the world of non-relational data on Azure. What are some of the services and the key concepts that I need to know about?
One of the most fundamental services is Azure Storage. It's like the Swiss Army knife of storage solutions. And within Azure Storage, there are, several different types that are optimized for different uses.
We talked about Azure Storage a little bit earlier. Can you remind me what the different types are and what they're good for?
Yeah, so you've got your blob storage, which we said is, your go-to for unstructured data, like images, audio, video. Then there's file storage, which is basically like a cloud-based file share, and you can access it from, anywhere. It's great for collaborating and, sharing files between different applications.
So blob storage is for the raw, the unstructured data, and file storage is for more structured file sharing. What about that third type?
Right. So that's table storage. It's designed for storing structured NoSQL data. So it gives you a way to organize data with rows and columns, but without the rigid schema of a traditional relational database.
Okay, so table storage offers some structure, but with more flexibility than a relational database. What about some other services for working with non-relational data?
Azure Cosmos DB, it's a really powerful service for managing that non-relational data, especially at scale. It's globally distributed, it's multi-model, and it can handle, all kinds of different data structures and workloads.
Okay, those are some pretty impressive sounding terms. Can you break those down for me? What does it mean for a database to be, globally distributed?
Okay, so imagine a global gaming platform or a social media application, something with users all around the world, right? With Azure Cosmos DB, your data it's replicated across multiple regions all over the world. And that means low latency and high availability for your users no matter where they are.
So users in, different continents can access the app without any lag, and they have the same experience. That's pretty amazing. What about this multi-model thing? What does that mean?
Azure Cosmos DB can support multiple different data models. You've got document, graph, key value, and column family. So you can pick the model that best fits your data and your application needs, all within the same database service.
So it's not just one type of database. It's like a collection of different databases all rolled into one. When would you choose one model over another?
For example, if you're building a web application and you need to store and retrieve JSON documents, well, the document model would be a good choice. If you're working with a social network or a recommendation system, the graph model might be a better choice. And if you just need a simple key value store for caching or session management, you could go with the key value model.
It sounds incredibly versatile. Is there anything else that makes Azure Cosmos DB special?
Azure Cosmos DB also offers a variety of different APIs for interacting with your data, and these APIs can work with different programming languages and preferences. So developers have the flexibility in how they build and integrate their applications.
So whether you like working with, SQL-like syntax or you prefer, other approaches like MongoDB or Cassandra APIs, Cosmos DB can handle it. It sounds like a pretty powerful solution for a lot of different non-relational needs. Now, we've talked about, representing data, storing it, and managing it. But what about actually, getting insights from it, making sense of it all?
That's where, the really exciting world of analytics workloads comes in. And Azure has a really strong set of services to help you process, analyze, and visualize data so you can see hidden patterns and make better decisions.
All right, let's dive into that world, analytics workloads on Azure. What are some of the key concepts and tools that we need to understand?
When you're working with analytics on a large scale, you often have to deal with, data ingestion and processing. You have to collect all this data from all these different sources and then transform it into a usable format and then store it in an efficient way.
It sounds like a real logistical challenge, especially when you're dealing with huge amounts of data coming in from all over the place.
Yeah.
So how does Azure help with that?
Azure Data Factory is a really powerful service that lets you, orchestrate and automate all those data pipelines. It's kind of like the conductor of an orchestra. It makes sure that all the data flows smoothly and efficiently from its sources to its destinations.
So Data Factory it's like the control center, right? For managing the flow of data in your Azure environment.
hmm
What happens? What happens once the data's been collected and processed? Where does it go?
That's where analytical data stores come in. Azure has, all kinds of options depending on what you need and what kind of analysis you're doing. One popular choice is Azure Synapse Analytics. It's a high-performance data warehousing solution really designed for crunching, massive amounts of data.
So if you're working with tons of structured data
Yeah.
and you need to, do complex queries and aggregations, Azure Synapse Analytics is the tool to use.
Exactly. Yeah, it's built for speed and scalability, which makes it ideal for those really demanding analytical workloads. And then you've got Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. It's designed to store a wide variety of data, including, your unstructured and semi-structured data.
We talked about data lake storage before in the context of non-relational data. So it can also be used for analytics.
Oh, absolutely. Data Lake Storage Gen 2 is like a massive data reservoir. It can hold petabytes of information. It's very scalable, it's cost effective, and that makes it great for storing data for future analysis, even if you don't know exactly what kind of analysis you'll be doing yet.
Sounds like a really flexible solution for storing all kinds of different data. Provides a foundation for future work. So we've got Azure Data Factory for managing data flow, Azure Synapse Analytics for data warehousing, and Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 for storing, all kinds of data. Are there any other key services or concepts that we need to understand in the world of, large scale analytics?
One important concept to understand is the difference between batch processing and stream processing.
I've heard those terms before, but I haven't quite grasped the difference between them. Can you explain it?
Okay, so batch processing is it's like baking a cake. You gather all your ingredients, you mix them all up, and you bake the whole cake, in one go. So in batch processing, you collect all the data over a period of time, and then you process it all at once in one big batch.
So it's a scheduled process where you analyze a big chunk of data all at the same time. What about stream processing?
Stream processing is more like pouring a glass of water. The water flows continuously and you can fill your glass whenever you want. So in stream processing, the data is analyzed as it's coming in real time.
Okay, that makes sense. So batch processing is for analyzing data that you've already collected, and stream processing is for analyzing data as it's being generated live. Azure offers different services for handling those two types of processing, right?
Exactly. For batch processing, you might use services like Azure Databricks or HG Insight, which provide powerful clusters that can process large data sets. And for stream processing, you've got services like Azure Stream Analytics and Azure Data Explorer. They're designed for ingesting and analyzing data in real time.
It seems like Azure has a solution for every analytics scenario, whether you're
Oh.
dealing with batch processing or stream processing or structured data or unstructured data. But what about the part where we actually start communicating these insights to other people? How do we make the data, meaningful and actionable?
That's where data visualization comes in.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm looking forward to it. It's been fascinating to learn how Azure handles all the complexities of data management and analysis. It sounds like a really powerful platform, with tools and services for every step of the way. Welcome back. It's the final part of our deep dive into Azure data management. We've talked about a lot from, data representation and storage to those complex analytics workloads. Now it's time to get into security and compliance and governance in Azure.
Right. We've covered how to, manage and analyze data, but we also need to know how to protect that data and make sure it's, used responsibly and ethically.
Yeah, it seems like data security it's just more and more critical these days. You see all these headlines about data breaches and privacy. So what are some of the key things to think about when we're talking about, securing data in Azure?
Azure takes a layered approach to security. It gives you all kinds of tools and services to protect your data at different levels. One of those fundamental layers is network security, which is about controlling and monitoring the flow of traffic that's coming in and out of your Azure resources.
So it's like building a fortress around your data
Yeah.
with walls and gates to keep unauthorized access out.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Azure has services like virtual networks and network security groups and application gateways. You use those to create a secure perimeter around all your data.
Can you give me some examples of how these services work, in the real world?
Sure. So virtual networks let you create these isolated network environments within Azure, and that separates your data from the public internet. Network security groups, they act like firewalls. You can use them to set the rules for what kind of traffic can get through. And then application gateways add another layer of protection because they filter traffic based on specific application level protocols.
Okay, it sounds like a pretty robust system for controlling access to your data, but what about controlling who has access inside your organization?
That's where identity and access management comes in. Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, that's the central service for managing, your users and your groups and all the permissions. You can use Azure AD to define different roles, and then grant or deny access to specific resources based on those roles.
So it's like having different levels of clearance, right? Making sure that people can only see the data that they need to do their jobs.
Exactly. Yeah. Azure also has role-based access control or RBAC, which lets you, really fine-tune the permissions at a very granular level.
Okay, so we've got network security and we've got access control. What about What about protecting the data itself?
Encryption is really important for data protection, and Azure has a whole bunch of encryption options, both at rest and in transit.
Well, what's the difference between data at rest and data in transit?
Okay, so data at rest, that's data that's just sitting on a disk or some other storage media. Data in transit is data that's moving across a network, like, between your application and the database.
So it's like the difference between, data sitting in a vault and data being transported in an armored truck.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So Azure offers services like Azure Disk Encryption for virtual machines, transparent data encryption for SQL databases, and storage service encryption for data that's stored in Azure Storage Services. These services, they make sure that your data is encrypted even if somebody gets a hold of the storage media.
So it sounds like Azure is serious about data encryption. They give you options for protecting your data, no
Yeah.
matter where it is. What about that data in transit? How is that protected?
Azure uses, industry standard protocols like TLS and SSL to protect that data as it moves over the network. So that ensures that all that sensitive information, your passwords, credit card numbers, it's all scrambled, unreadable if anyone tries to intercept it.
Azure seems to have a pretty comprehensive security toolkit. What about compliance? There are so many regulations out there these days, especially when it comes to sensitive data.
Yeah, you're right. Compliance is a big deal for most organizations, and Azure offers a whole range of features and certifications to help you meet all the requirements of all these different industry standards and regulations.
Can you give me some examples of those regulations and how Azure actually helps you comply with them?
Sure. So high pay, or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, that's a U.S. law that sets standards for protecting sensitive patient health information. Azure has services and features that are HIPAA compliant, so healthcare organizations can store and manage all that patient data securely in the cloud.
So if you're working with healthcare data, Azure gives you the tools and services that meet those really strict HIPAA requirements. What about other regulations?
GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, that's a law in the European Union.
Yeah.
It gives individuals more control over their personal data. Azure has features to help you comply with GDPR, like data subject requests, being able to delete data and data masking techniques.
It sounds like Azure's got compliance covered on a global scale.
Mm.
Are there any other big regulations or compliance areas that people should know about?
PCI DSS, or the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, that's another important one. It's a set of standards that are specifically designed to protect credit card information. And Azure has services that are PCI DSS compliant, so businesses can process and store that payment card data securely in the cloud.
So whether you're in, healthcare or e-commerce or any other industry that handles sensitive information, Azure gives you, the tools and certifications you need to show that you're following the rules. Now, what about data governance? It seems like that's a less talked about part of data management.
Data governance is about, managing data in a responsible and ethical way throughout its entire life cycle. So that means, defining policies, procedures, and processes for how you collect, how you store, how you use, and how you share all that data.
So data governance is about setting up a set of rules and guidelines, for how data should be handled in an organization.
Right, exactly. And Azure provides a lot of services and tools to help you implement and actually enforce those data governance policies.
Can you give me some examples of how those tools work?
Yeah. Azure Purview is a data governance service that helps you discover, classify, and manage data across all your data. It can, identify sensitive data, track where it comes from, and make sure it's being used according to your policies.
So Azure Purview is like a central control panel for managing data governance for the whole company.
That's a good way to look at it. Azure also has Azure Data Catalog, which is, for documenting and sharing data assets. And then there's Azure Policy for defining and enforcing rules across all your Azure resources.
It sounds like Azure's got a really comprehensive suite of services for governing data responsibly. But it's not just about the tools and technologies, right? It seems like data governance also involves people and processes.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Data governance is about creating a culture of data responsibility within your organization. That means training your employees, teaching them about data policies, having clear lines of accountability, and really fostering a data-driven mindset.
So it's about giving people the power to make data-driven decisions, but also making sure that that data is used ethically and responsibly.
Exactly. Data is really powerful, but we have to manage it in a smart way.
This deep dive has been incredibly useful. We've gone through this whole landscape of Azure data management from the fundamentals to those more advanced concepts like security, compliance, and governance. What are some key takeaways for our listeners who are just getting started with Azure and data?
One key takeaway is that it's a comprehensive platform for managing all your data in the cloud. It has the tools and services for every part of that data lifecycle, whether you're working with, structured data, unstructured data, batch processing, stream processing, and, analytics, visualization, Azure can handle it.
Yeah, it seems like Azure offers just a remarkable level of flexibility and scalability, right? You can create data solutions that really fit your specific needs.
Another takeaway is that security and compliance and governance, they're really important considerations for any data project. Azure gives you, strong security features, compliance certifications, and all the governance tools to help you, protect your data and make sure it's used responsibly.
Data security is definitely on everyone's mind these days, and it's good to know that Azure takes it seriously.
And finally, remember that data management isn't just about the technology. It's also about the people and the processes. Building a data-driven culture that involves training people, setting clear policies, and really creating a mindset of data responsibility.
This deep dive has really given me a much clearer understanding of all the possibilities and the responsibilities of working with data in Azure. It's a fascinating field, and it's changing so quickly, and I feel a lot more prepared to jump into it now.
That's great to hear. As data becomes even more important in the world, understanding these concepts and tools for managing it is going to be, really valuable no matter what industry you're in.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and taking us through this deep dive into Azure data management. I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot of really valuable information.